First of all, thank you very much for joining us for tonight's celebration. We're celebrating 40 years of Aga Khan Foundation Canada, and I know you've been involved with AKFC, but also with the Aga Khan Rural Support Program. So, can you tell me a little bit about the program and your involvement with the foundation?
Well, thank you, Huz. I've been associated with AKRSP and the Aga Khan Foundation Canada for quite some time now. I grew up in one of the villages where AKRSP first started its program back in early 80s. And then when I did my undergrades, I joined AKRSP. That was my first job. And then I was fortunate to have the opportunity to lead the organization as a general manager in recent years. So you can say that I have known the organization from both community side, but also in various professional roles.
Now, this is in Pakistan, right? Because didn't it start in?
It's in Pakistan, yeah, exactly, in northern Pakistan. So the program started in northern Pakistan, as I said, in early 80s, with the objective of addressing poverty, extreme poverty in the region, and also to improve quality of life of local communities. The program was founded on the belief that communities can transform their own lives if a program like AKRSP can help them organize and unleash their collective energies. And at the time, explaining the unique context of Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral and the difficulties communities face and the new developments at the time like Karakoram Highway construction, His Highness Aga Khan characterized AKRSP as a program which enabled communities to participate in developing what they thought they need and in finding solutions to practical everyday problems. So, driven by this central philosophy of community first, over the years, AKRSP organized local communities into village organizations and women's organizations, and over time also into their federations, and work across a number of themes, basically, which were important for the local communities. For example, work in the natural resource management, which includes agriculture, livestock, and forestry and other related sectors, on enterprise development, microfinance, women's empowerment, skills, and community physical infrastructure, which covered roads, irrigation channels, and even small-scale energy generation projects. So the spectrum of work AKRSP did over the years was quite multi-thematic and quite massive.
Yeah, the spectrum, that's the right word, actually. It just seems very vast. Is that what makes it so unique? Is that one of the things that makes AKRSP so unique? Because for it to be going on for 40 years that says something, you know?
So you touched upon very important feature of it, 40 years, right? So it's a very long-term program with a very long-term view. So that itself is a very unique feature. The other important feature, as I noted, was the centrality of communities' first approach, right? So this is the very central piece of the program. And beyond these two important features, I would say that it's a very broad-based program. By that, I mean that it actually engages majority of households across the region where we work, both men and women, and all kinds of population segments. And it's truly a broad-based organization. And very few organizations you will see will have that kind of like deep engagement and a footprint in the region, right? The second important feature is multi-thematic. And and that is important because it increases the relevance of the program, right? So it addresses the multiplicity of needs of the communities, which are so important to advance the quality of life, which is not just say, for example, income or any other one domain of life. So in that way, it's also very unique. And we don't talk often much about it, but the third important unique feature is that it is anchored in the broader academian family, which brings to bear resources in other important sectors. For example, education, health, habitat, economic development, and cultural development. When you think about other programs and unique features of this one, the fact that we are part of a larger network also gives us a lot of assets, both knowledge-wise, human resources-wise, as well as our programs to create deeper and a wider impact in the region.
That's one of the things that I'm finding very enlightening. Doing these interviews is there's the program, there's like AKFC, and you go down there and it's sort of like a grassroots and multifaceted. But then you're right, the fact that it's part of a larger development network, it's like it is growing, and it's about building a sustainable region and a sustainable country, which I find I didn't really grasp that really honestly until now, like the real, like just how important that is and how important the development network is to the process. I find that very exciting. One of the things that we're celebrating, this is 40 years, we're celebrating and we're thanking, Canadians, the community, we're thanking the government, in this country. Can you talk a little bit about the role of the government of Canada and the relationship it has with Aga Khan Foundation Canada over the past 4 decades?
The relationship between Aga Khan Foundation and, for that matter, with AKFC and the government of Canada, at the time it was called CEDA, now it is called Global Affairs Canada, right? So the long-term nature of this relationship has been truly enduring, transformative, and evolutionary. But what do I mean by these different terms, right? So one is that, from the very beginning, Canadian government was the first one to support this, rather the first pioneering community development program in one of the remotest parts of Pakistan. And what this long-term relationship gave AKFC is the continuity and the long-term horizon in terms of program thinking, and also to work with the Canadian government to co-design and co-imagine programs which were informed by the learnings of the past, but also very relevant to today and forward-looking. And this is truly a very unique feature. Very rarely you see these kind of long-term partnerships, which are so essential for both stability, sustainability of the impact which we create in many of these geographies. I also call it a very evolutionary, in the sense that in the early years, majority of support from Canadian government, and for that matter from other donors, was around some of the critical needs on the ground, which are around irrigation, infrastructure, agriculture, and the initial formation of community organization. Over a period of time, the relationship has evolved to focus on emerging and more complex issues, if you like, right? For example, strengthening community institutions, women's empowerment, youth opportunity, and youth development. These are the new challenges which we face in many of these communities. And in that way, essentially, this evolutionary relationship has been very critical. I also call it transformative in the sense that the early investments which CEDA made, today their impacts and the multiplier effects are in many ways, truly profound. I recall taking some of senior officials of government of Canada a few years ago to one of the remotest villages in Upper Hunza to a social village where in the early 80s, probably a few $1,000s of investment in irrigation channel has now transformed a complete barren land into an oasis. Obviously, it has contributed to the economic well-being of the people, but it's also contributed to the environmental well-being in the region, right? And this is just one example, but there are multiple examples across many villages and the valleys. And you won't believe the land values in those areas are now in millions of dollars. So a small catalytic investment in the community can create so much profound impact over a period of time. I want to also kind of emphasize one important point. I think Canadian government's support was also instrumental in shaping the thinking at AKRSP and I would say at AKFC around women's empowerment early on. Not many people were at the time probably as I would say forcefully advocating and investing in this important area. And over a period of time, we have seen both increased resources from the Canadian government to do more in this space. So I would call that it is truly a very important relationship for AKD, and both in terms of informing our thinking, but also in terms of creating the impacts on the ground in the lives of the people who matter.
And would you say, because these sound notable, my question is, would you say that these are the notable achievements if you had to pick a couple over your time with AKRSP?
So the AKRSP achievements, obviously, there are other important bilateral and multilateral donors who have invested, including government, have invested their resources in advancing the objectives of AKRSP and the communities. Beyond these important milestones, which I just mentioned, at a much larger level, AKRSP was in many ways was seen as a very successful program for achieving the rapid increase in the incomes of local people. That was one of the stated objectives, and I think within 1 decade or so, the incomes of the local people were doubled, right? The other important feature, and this was possible because together with the communities being on the front and the center of the development, AKRSP being in the supportive role, there were massive kind of like achievements around, say, for example, tree plantation, which counts in millions. I mean, more than 40 million forests and fruit trees have been planted in those regions. Infrastructure, roads and bridges and hydropower projects, in some places they actually provide electricity to more than 50% of population. And then irrigation canals in thousands. So all those were important in terms of strengthening the livelihoods and the overall well-being of the communities. But I would also say that the impact did not only were limited to that particular region. The program was replicated across Pakistan. In RSPs today, it actually has an outreach of 54 million people across Pakistan. And the Khan Foundation, in its own right, also replicated the program, for example, in Tajikistan, in Kyrgyz Republic, in India, and the elements of the program and approach was also taken to other countries, Afghanistan and East Africa. So that is kind of like, I would say the impact are not only limited to the local communities, but the developmental impact is much bigger. I also want to note one important thing here is very recently, in early, I think 2011, Canadian government supported us to work on youth engagement and employment issues. And we are now replicating that with other donor support in, for example, Kyrgyz Republic, and we are informing our youth thinking, youth development thinking in other regions. Again, inspired and learned by some of the investments which we received from the Canadian government.
Well, it's just great that you mentioned that, because one of the things that I was reading about was how the program in northern Pakistan was then replicated, exactly what you said, to other regions and then other countries, and it just seems like a proven model. Can you talk a little bit about how the model is implemented, because it's also working with, my understanding, working with the local communities and serving their specific needs. Can you talk about how taking this existing model that is successful in northern Pakistan and how it was spread to other developing nations?
So obviously context matters, right? In other places, the fundamental and the core philosophy is always the same. Basically, communities first. You have to put faith in the community's ability to mobilize and take initiatives around finding solutions for their local needs, right? So that is the fundamental core philosophy. And the approach, depending on the country, in some cases we have created the similar kind of VOs and WOs, right? In other places, a more kind of coordinated effort with the lowest tiers of government structures to create, for example, community development councils. So I think it's important that it's not like we are replicating a blueprint. In many ways, what we are replicating is a philosophy and some of the core values of the program. And the shape and the size and the scope of the interventions across different themes vary. Where AKDN, other entities of AKDN, for example, are not as big, or in some countries, some of the health and education related issues are also addressed by other RSPs. So it depends on the context as well.
That's cool. Can you, and I like that you mentioned that it's a philosophy, because that to me really makes sense, and I think it's also very sensitive to individual circumstances. What is next for the program? What's the dream? What's the future? What are things on the pipeline? What's the next 40 years look like?
Yeah, so that's $1 billion question, right? So I think one of the important features, if you think about essentially again, I will go back to the philosophy, right? The future, you cannot predict. It is ever changing. The best investment is investment in the people's capabilities and their institutions so that they can adapt and respond. And in many ways, I guess the central piece of our work, I think we need to do more. Right? So we need to do more in terms of both investing in the capabilities of the communities and their institution, as well as AKRSP as a support organization to make sure that we respond to the emerging needs of the communities in a very agile, responsive, and effective manner. So that is, I would say, the broad element of our response, which we need to kind of like continue. But if I were to highlight a few, 3-4 key areas where we can do more or need to do more, one is obviously the issue of food security and nutrition, particularly for those who continue to remain underserved or who live in the pockets of poverty, if you like, right? And this pandemic has only kind of magnified the need for some of those interventions. And this work is anchored at AKRSP in the kind of long-term work in agriculture and nature resource management. The one additional element I would like to emphasize with respect to the agriculture work in general and the food security is that we need to now make our work more responsive to the realities of climate change. I guess this is a new reality, and we need to make sure that our investments are actually kind of like both mitigate the impact of climate change and help communities adapt and respond to some of the challenges which we foresee coming down the road. So that's one important area which I would say will remain important for AKRSP. The second area is youth opportunity, particularly around economic opportunities, right? So we have a growing population of youth in this region, and which is increasingly literate, thanks to the investment of academic institutions in education, government investment in this sector, and other private players who have come forward to work in this space in the region. So we have an increasingly literate but aspiring youth, right? But what we are clearly kind of not finding a matching kind of solution is around employment, if you like, right? So there are limited local employment opportunities. So we want to be more purposeful in our response to this emerging and important issue. And here we will have to do more in promoting entrepreneurship and enterprise development, but also work on what I would call the future of work initiatives, right? To prepare youth for the new economy and the new world of work. And luckily, we already have a purpose-built entity called Accelerate Prosperity, which will now be working more in the small and growing business space to make sure that some of those businesses create opportunities for young men and women. But we will also kind of, also refine our work within other AKRSP teams together with our education colleagues to make sure that we do more in this both preparing youth for both self-employment, but the jobs in growth professions and digital economy. The third area, which is I know it's very important for us, but also important more broadly globally, is the women's empowerment. And here we need to specifically focus on amplifying the voices and the influence of women on decisions and the institutions that impact their lives, and more broadly expand the economic opportunities for women in the region.
Right.
And finally, I think, as I said, at the core of our work is institutional development and strengthening the communities, institutions, and community engagement. We clearly see now the opportunities to refine and enrich this approach through a number of means. One is that increasing our focus on inclusion of women and the vulnerable segments of the population who might have been left out over a period of time. Our new vulnerable groups are coming forward. So we need to make sure that our institutions and our support actually focuses on some of those poorest vulnerable groups, one. Two, we need to leverage technology to increase our engagement with the communities, the way we engage with them, right? So both in terms of communication, both in terms of getting their feedback and views, but also the way in which we can deliver services to them. And then there are new tools to increase the participation of communities in finding solutions and designing solutions to their problems. Design thinking is one example, and other ways in which people co-create. So I would think that there is plenty which AKRSP can and will be doing going forward.
Well, I mean, listen, I think you gave us a really good overview of some of the accomplishments that AKRSP has done over the last 4 decades, and the relationship with the Canadian government, I think, highlighted just it's like a very important and fruitful relationship. And now, you're right, there is some more work to be done, but if the last 4 decades has shown us anything, is that it is possible. Abdul, thank you very much for your time. Congratulations, and thank you for your dedication and your passion, and for spending this time with me and all of us here as we celebrate 40 years of Aga Khan Foundation Canada. Thank you.
And thank you again for taking the time to sit with me and talk about the aerospace work together with Global Affairs Canada. And, obviously on behalf of communities, I am one of those members of the community, as well as on behalf of Acadian. Obviously, we are most grateful to the Canadian government and the people of Canada, the taxpayers and the people who have contributed to this journey, if you like. Thank you so much for your time as well. Take care.
Thanks. Thank you, brother.